The storm raged outside, its ferocity a mirror of the turmoil brewing within the walls of the old house. Hannah stood at the window, her breath fogging the glass as she stared into the abyss. The wind howled like a warning, but she didn't listen, not yet. She could feel it. Something was wrong. The house was too quiet, too still. Every creak of the floorboards seemed to echo louder in the silence. The walls closing in on her. Her heart raced, but she tried to stay calm. There had been no sign, no reason to fear. Yet the unease lingered like a shadow just beyond her reach. Suddenly, the faintest whisper slithered through the room, so quiet, so soft, that it could have been a figment of her imagination. But then it came again, clearer this time. A name. Hannah. Hannah. She turned quickly, but the room remained empty. Nothing. The whispering stopped. For a moment, she thought she imagined it. But deep down, she knew. Whatever was in this house, it had found her. Hannah paced the room, every creak of the floorboards making her jump. She had no explanation for the strange events, but they were undeniable. A chill had settled over her, one that had nothing to do with the storm. The air felt heavier, like it was pressing in from all sides. She tried to shake the feeling off, but it clung to her, relentless. The whisper from earlier was still fresh in her mind. Had someone spoken her name, or was it just her imagination? Get a grip, she told herself, trying to steady her racing thoughts. Yet every corner she glanced at seemed to hide something just out of view. The shadows, they felt alive. A slight tremor ran through her as she dared another look at the corner where she thought she saw movement. Nothing. But her instincts screamed otherwise. This house was not what it seemed. It had never been. It wasn't until the lights flickered that Hannah's unease turned to dread. The house had been quiet, too quiet, but now the atmosphere felt charged with an energy she couldn't comprehend. Her heart pounded in her chest as she watched the light above her flicker once more. Then it went out completely. The darkness enveloped her like a heavy blanket. For a moment, she stood still, listening to the silence, which was broken only by the soft sound of her breath. The flickering lights weren't a coincidence. They never were. Something was in this house. But what? A thought crept into her mind, one she refused to acknowledge. Maybe it's time to leave. But where could she go? Her footsteps echoed down the hallway, but it felt like someone was following. She wasn't alone anymore. The sound of footsteps echoed from behind her. Hannah's heart skipped a beat. She spun around, her eyes searching the dark room. But there was no one there. She strained her ears, listening for the sound again, but the silence pressed in, thick and suffocating. She was losing her mind. "It's just a house," she whispered, but the words offered no comfort. She knew it wasn't the house. Something or someone was in the shadows watching her. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up as she slowly backed away, her hands trembling as she reached for the door. "I need to get out of here." But as she touched the door handle, a voice, so close, so real, whispered her name again. "Hannah." The door slammed shut, trapping her inside. Panic surged through Hannah as she tried the door again. It wouldn't budge. The voice had come again, clearer this time, like a chilling whisper right in her ear. She could feel the walls closing in around her. Her breath came faster, and her hands shook uncontrollably as she pulled at the door with all her strength. It was no use. The house seemed to have its grip on her, trapping her in a nightmare she couldn't escape. Every inch of her body screamed to run, but the house wouldn't let her. She staggered back, her eyes scanning the room. That's when she saw it. In the reflection of the broken mirror, she saw a figure standing behind her. The figure smiled, and for the first time, Hannah knew she was not alone. Hannah sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling as she clutched the worn blanket. The storm outside had not let up, but it was the storm inside her mind that troubled her the most. She tried to ignore the fear, tried to tell herself it was just the isolation getting to her. But the whispers, the sounds she couldn't explain, they were real. Every corner of the house felt like a trap, every shadow a threat. She had come here hoping for peace, but instead she had found nothing but dread. "Why did I come here?" she muttered to herself. The question echoed in the empty room, but there was no answer. Only silence. That silence was the loudest thing of all. She pressed her hands over her ears, but it didn't help. The voice inside her head, the one that kept telling her to leave, grew louder, more urgent. But where could she go? What was she even running from? The stillness of the night grew oppressive as Hannah lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The house groaned around her as if alive, as if it were watching her. She closed her eyes, hoping for sleep, but every time she did, the whispering returned. It was subtle at first, a faint murmur she could almost ignore, but it grew louder and clearer with each passing moment. Hannah! The voice was unmistakable now, and it wasn't her imagination. The voice had weight. It had presence. She sat up in bed, heart pounding. The sheets tangled around her legs. She reached for the bedside lamp, but it flickered out before she could turn it on. Panic gripped her chest as the room darkened. She was trapped in a nightmare, and there was no escape. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to grow longer, as if reaching for her. Hannah's breath came in ragged gasps as she jumped out of bed, her feet barely touching the cold floor. She needed to leave. She couldn't stay here. But as she stumbled toward the door, her eyes were drawn to the hallway beyond. The walls, once familiar, now seemed menacing, as though they were closing in on her. Each step felt heavier than the last, like the house itself was pushing against her. She reached the door and grabbed the handle, only for it to twist in her grip as if it was being held from the other side. A soft, mocking laugh echoed from somewhere in the house, but Hannah couldn't tell where. Panic surged through her. She pulled at the door, but it refused to open. She was trapped. The house wasn't letting her leave. The door finally gave way, and Hannah stepped into the hallway. The oppressive darkness swallowed her whole, making every movement feel slow, like she was wading through thick fog. She moved cautiously, her footsteps barely making a sound on the old wooden floors. The house felt wrong, too quiet, too still. But then she heard it again. The whispering, that same voice, calling her name. Hannah! The sound echoed down the hallway, only to be swallowed by the shadows. Her breath hitched, and she hurried down the corridor, her pulse racing. The whispering grew louder. Now a chorus of voices, all calling her name. She reached the end of the hallway where a door loomed, its wood darkened and worn by time. It was the last place she wanted to go, but something drew her toward it, an invisible force urging her forward. The door creaked open, and a gust of cold air rushed out, hitting Hannah like a physical blow. She stepped inside, her legs shaking, every part of her urging her to turn back. But she didn't, not yet. The room was small, claustrophobic. Dust hung in the air like a veil, and the remnants of an old bed were scattered across the floor. But what caught her attention was the mirror on the wall. It was cracked, the glass distorted, but there was something about it that drew her in. As she approached, her reflection blurred. But when she looked again, she didn't see herself. Instead, a figure stood behind her, its face obscured by shadows. Hannah's heart stopped. The figure stepped forward, its breath cold against her neck. She spun around, but there was no one there. She was alone, or was she? The morning didn't bring relief. If anything, the daylight only made everything seem worse. The house, once so full of promise, now felt even more oppressive. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind outside made Hannah's skin crawl. She couldn't escape the feeling that something was watching her, waiting for her to make the wrong move. She tried to leave, but the front door wouldn't open. The windows were locked tight, as if the house itself were keeping her inside. The walls seemed to be closing in, the air growing heavier by the second. She tried to focus, to think clearly, but the fear was overwhelming. "What do you want from me?" she whispered to the empty room. But there was no answer. No sound except for the relentless whispering, always just beyond hearing. Her mind was spinning out of control, trapped in a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. The house wasn't just haunted, it was alive. Every step she took felt like it was being watched. The walls, the floors, even the air seemed to whisper her name, beckoning her to stay. She tried to ignore it, tried to tell herself it was just her mind playing tricks, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. Every time she turned a corner, she expected to see someone, or something, lurking in the shadows. And sometimes she thought she did. The fear was relentless, a constant companion she couldn't outrun. She tried calling for help, but the phone line was dead. The house was cutting her off from the outside world. The sense of being trapped grew stronger, and soon she realized the truth: there was no escape. Hannah's panic deepened with every step. The walls seemed to breathe, the air thick with a presence that pressed against her chest. She wanted to scream, to run, but she couldn't seem to find the strength. Her footsteps echoed through the empty house, the sound ringing out like a warning. As she passed by the living room, she saw the reflection in the glass of the broken mirror. At first she thought it was her imagination, but when she looked again, it was unmistakable. There, standing just behind her reflection, was a figure, a shadow that didn't belong. A cold, oppressive chill ran down her spine as she spun around, only to find the room empty. The silence was deafening. Her heart pounded in her chest as she backed away, her mind screaming for her to leave, but the door was still locked. There was no way out. Hannah's breath quickened as she stumbled back, her eyes fixed on the empty room behind her. The silence was suffocating, and yet she could feel something watching her, waiting. She reached for the door again, her fingers trembling as she gripped the handle, but it still wouldn't open. The oppressive darkness seemed to seep in around her, the house closing in, suffocating her. A cold gust of wind swept through the room, flickering the dim light above her. She looked around, expecting to see something in the shadows, but the room was still. For a moment, she thought maybe it had all been in her head. Then she heard it, a soft tapping, like fingernails against wood. The sound came from the attic. Her body froze, and every part of her screamed to run, but her feet wouldn't move. She had to go up there. She had to find out what was making the noise. The attic door creaked open as Hannah slowly ascended the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. Her breath was shallow, and her heart raced in her chest. The tapping grew louder, echoing through the house. She reached the top of the stairs and hesitated. The attic was dark, the air thick with dust. She could barely make out the outlines of old furniture and forgotten boxes. Her hands shook as she fumbled for the light switch, but when the light flickered on, nothing seemed to change. The tapping stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. Something was waiting for her in the dark, something that had been watching her from the moment she stepped foot in this house. As her eyes scanned the room, she saw it, a figure, pale and twisted, standing in the far corner. It smiled. Hannah's mind raced as she backed away from the twisted figure in the attic. Her breath was shallow, the room spinning around her. The figure moved closer, its face still hidden by shadows, but the smile was clear. "You should have left when you had the chance," a voice, cold and mocking, echoed through the room. Hannah's stomach twisted as the voice seemed to come from everywhere, reverberating off the walls. "I told you this house would never let you go." Her legs buckled beneath her, and she collapsed to the floor, her hands pressed against the cold wooden beams. "Why?" she whispered, struggling to hold herself upright. The figure laughed softly, a low, almost sympathetic sound. "Because you never should have come here. You're mine now." The words hit her like a punch, the weight of them crushing any hope she had left. The house wasn't just haunted, it was alive, and it had claimed her as its own. Hannah's hands shook as she pushed herself up, her legs unsteady. She wanted to run, but the walls seemed to close in around her. The figure didn't move, but she could feel its presence, oppressive and suffocating. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The figure stepped closer, its eyes gleaming in the dim light. "You should have never come here. This house is my prison, and now, so are you," it replied, its voice a cold, bitter echo. Hannah's mind spun as the words sank in. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "I didn't do anything." The figure tilted its head, its grin widening. "Oh, but you did. You always do." Hannah's heart pounded in her chest as the air seemed to grow colder. She could feel the house, its walls pressing in, suffocating her. She wasn't just trapped here. She was part of the nightmare now, a prisoner bound to the house forever. Suddenly, the figure stepped forward, its form becoming more defined. As it moved closer, the air grew colder, and Hannah's breath became visible, each exhale clouding the space around her. Her mind raced for a way out, but the house wouldn't let her go. "You'll never escape," the figure whispered, its voice now sharp and menacing. "I am the house and you are mine." Hannah's eyes darted around the room, searching for something, anything that could help her. The walls seemed to pulse, the air thick with a malevolent energy. She felt the weight of the house pressing down on her, suffocating her. She had no choice but to confront the truth. This house, this nightmare, was a prison, and she was its latest victim. "I won't be trapped by you," she said through gritted teeth, her fear giving way to a desperate anger. "I will fight." The figure stopped just in front of her, its presence overwhelming. "You can't fight me," it whispered, its voice cold and full of certainty. Hannah's heart raced, but she refused to back down. "I don't have to fight you," she said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her insides. "I just have to survive." The figure tilted its head, almost as if considering her words. For a brief moment, the room fell silent, the air thick with anticipation. Hannah's hands clenched into fists at her sides. She wasn't going to let this thing win. "You can't escape me," it said, its voice dripping with malice. "This is your fate now. You belong to the house." Hannah swallowed hard, but she refused to show any more fear. She was running out of options, but she wasn't going to give up. Not yet, not without a fight. Not without a fight. As the figure moved closer, Hannah felt a surge of panic. She couldn't fight it, she couldn't escape. The house had already claimed her. But there was one thing she hadn't considered. Maybe the house itself was a prison for both of them. With that thought, something shifted inside her. "I'm not the only one trapped here, am I?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The figure froze, its grin faltering for a split second. "You don't understand," it hissed, its tone more desperate now. "I was once like you. I thought I could escape, but now I'm part of the house, and you will be too." Hannah stepped forward, her resolve hardening. "Then we'll be trapped together." The figure recoiled, its form flickering. The realization hit her. Maybe she could use the house against itself, turn its power back on the thing that had made her its prisoner. Hannah stood at the edge of the attic, the shadowy figure looming before her, its sinister grin still in place. The air was thick with tension, the walls closing in around them. "This ends now," she whispered, her voice shaking but determined. The house had already taken so much from her, and she couldn't let it claim her soul. The figure stepped forward, its form flickering in and out like a fading light. "You think you can defeat me? You are nothing but a part of this house now." Its voice echoed with the weight of 1,000 years of torment. But Hannah wasn't listening anymore. Her body felt cold, but her mind burned with clarity. She had nothing left to lose. Every step she took was filled with purpose. "I'm not afraid of you," she said, her voice stronger now. The house wasn't her enemy. It was a prison, and she was going to break free. The figure let out a low, mocking laugh as it moved closer, its form becoming more solid. "You can't escape," it said, its voice cold as ice. "The house owns you now. There is no way out." Hannah's heart raced, but she stood her ground. She could feel the weight of the house pressing down on her, trying to choke the life out of her, but she refused to give in. The floor beneath her groaned as if the house itself was trying to swallow her whole. "You're wrong," she said, her voice steady. "I will never be a part of this place. I will never belong to you." She reached out, her hand trembling but resolute as she touched the wall. "This house, this nightmare, ends tonight." The figure hesitated for the first time, uncertainty flickering in its eyes. Hannah could feel the house's power wavering. Just for a moment, this was her chance. The figure snarled, its form growing larger and more grotesque as it approached her. "You think you can defy me?" it hissed. But Hannah didn't flinch. The house trembled, its walls creaking in protest. "I am the house," the figure growled, its voice a deep, guttural rumble. "I control everything here. You belong to me." Hannah's mind raced, but she didn't show fear. She knew the truth now. This wasn't just a house, it was a trap. A living, breathing entity that fed on fear, on souls. And it had fed enough. "I'm not your prisoner anymore," she said, her voice growing louder, more confident. She stepped forward, the energy in the room shifting, the house groaning in defiance. "You're the one trapped here," the figure faltered, its dark form flickering. The ground beneath them cracked, and the house itself seemed to shake with fury. The figure recoiled, its form flickering violently as it tried to maintain its grip on the house. "You can't win," it spat, its voice laced with desperation. "This house is my soul. You can't destroy me." But Hannah wasn't listening. She focused all her energy, reaching deep within herself, tapping into a strength she didn't know she had. She pushed against the walls of the house, feeling the power of the evil that had taken root within it. "I don't need to destroy you," she said, her voice calm but unwavering. "I just need to set myself free." With a surge of energy, she pushed forward, the house groaning as if in agony. The figure's form wavered, its smile turning to a snarl of rage. But it was too late. Hannah had found the way out. The figure's form shattered, dissipating into the air like smoke. The house shook violently, its walls cracking, the floor splitting beneath Hannah's feet. She staggered back, the world around her unraveling. But she didn't fall. She didn't give in. "This is my freedom," she whispered, the words carrying a finality that rang through the crumbling house. The wind howled as the walls collapsed, the house crumbling to pieces. And in that moment, Hannah felt a lightness, a sense of peace she hadn't known in what felt like forever. The nightmare was over. She had broken free. As the last of the house's shadows faded, she stood alone in the open, the storm clearing above her. The sun began to rise, casting golden light over the destruction. Hannah had won. Hannah stood in the open field, the remnants of the house behind her, now a pile of rubble. The night was still, and the storm had completely passed. The sun, still low in the sky, cast a gentle light across the horizon. She breathed in the cool, fresh air, her body no longer weighed down by the heavy presence of the house. The suffocating fear that had once consumed her seemed to lift, but there was a hollow ache that lingered. She was free, but at what cost? The house, now destroyed, had claimed so much of her, and she wondered if she'd ever fully escape its grip. As she walked away from the wreckage, the silence seemed too loud, too empty. "It's over," she whispered to herself, but the words felt strange, as if they didn't hold the meaning she expected. The shadows of the past would never fully vanish. They would haunt her forever. As Hannah walked away from the wreckage, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching her. The wind had picked up, carrying with it the faintest whisper, just out of reach. "It's over," she told herself again, this time with more conviction. But deep down, she wasn't so sure. The house had been alive, a force of malevolent energy that had preyed on her fear, on her pain. She had faced it, defeated it, but there was still a gnawing feeling that the house's grip wasn't entirely gone. It couldn't be. No one ever truly escapes a place like that. The smile of the figure, the laughter, it all lingered in her mind, a haunting reminder. As the wind howled through the trees, she stopped and turned back, half expecting to see the house still standing. But all that remained was the rubble. Still, something told her that the nightmare wasn't entirely finished. Days passed, and the feeling of freedom that had initially washed over her began to fade. It wasn't the house that haunted her now. It was the silence. The absence of the constant threat had left a vacuum in her life. And in that space, doubts crept in. She'd survived, yes, but what had she lost in the process? Was she the same person who had walked into that house, or had she become something else entirely? Her nights were filled with restless dreams, flickers of images, whispers from the dark. She couldn't escape it. "I'll never forget it," she said aloud, though no one was there to hear. The house had been a part of her, and now, no matter where she went, it would never truly leave her. The lingering memories were her constant companions, forever etched into her mind. Hannah spent days wandering the land, trying to outrun the memories. But no matter how far she went, the darkness followed. She had sought solace in the quiet of nature, hoping it would heal the wounds the house had left behind. Yet, even here, there was an emptiness that couldn't be filled. "I've lost too much," she thought. The world seemed so vast, so empty. How could she ever hope to move on when the weight of what had happened pressed so heavily on her? As the days turned to weeks, the sense of being watched never went away. She could feel the eyes of the house on her, always just out of reach. The whispers came less frequently, but they were still there, like a distant echo. "It's over," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. But even as the words left her mouth, she knew they weren't true. The house wasn't gone. It was a part of her now, and it always would be. Hannah finally stopped running, standing still in the middle of the forest. The silence was overwhelming. The house was gone, but its presence still lingered, woven into the fabric of her life. Maybe there is no escape, she thought. The past was never going to leave her, and perhaps it shouldn't. Maybe it was a part of her now, something she had to carry with her. The sun dipped lower in the sky, and for a moment she felt something like peace. The forest around her was quiet, and the whispers in her mind had faded into a distant hum. But just as she was beginning to think she could find some semblance of normalcy, she heard it again. A soft whisper, too quiet to understand, but unmistakably familiar. "Hannah," she turned slowly, her heart pounding. The forest was still. Nothing was there, but she knew. The house hadn't really gone anywhere. It was still with her. The air around Hannah was still, but her heart raced in her chest. She could feel the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on her. The house was gone, but its influence lingered, following her like a shadow. She walked aimlessly, not sure where she was going, but driven by a need to put distance between herself and the nightmares of her past. The quiet was deafening, and the whisper of her name still echoed in her ears. It was as if the house had never really left her. No matter how far she ran, the fear remained. Maybe it never ends, she thought, her mind heavy with the realization that the terror would follow her, haunting her every step. She had escaped, but was there really any escaping the darkness that had taken root within her? She paused, staring into the distance, unsure of where the road ahead would lead, but knowing it would be just as uncertain as her mind. As the days passed, the feeling of being watched never left Hannah. She woke in the middle of the night, gasping for breath, the echo of her name still hanging in the air. The whispering was faint, but it was there. Sometimes she would turn, convinced someone was standing just behind her. But when she looked, there was only silence. The house had left, but the past hadn't. It was embedded in her, like a scar that no amount of time could heal. Every corner she turned, every quiet moment, seemed to echo with the events she had survived. It was as if the world had shifted in a way she couldn't understand. And every time the wind blew or the shadows grew long, the house was there again, hiding in the corners of her mind, waiting for her to remember. One night, as she walked through the town, Hannah stopped at the edge of a small lake. The surface was still, the water reflecting the moon above. She stared at her reflection, wondering if the woman staring back at her was still the same person who had walked into that house. She had survived, yes, but at what cost? The darkness had changed her, had marked her in ways she couldn't undo. She wondered if she'd ever be free of it. The whispering came again, soft but insistent. She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of it press against her mind. "I don't want to remember," she whispered into the night. But the memories wouldn't fade. The house had been a part of her life, and now it was a part of her soul. She opened her eyes and stared into the calm, dark water. Maybe it never really ends, she thought, her heart heavy with the truth. Hannah knew that she couldn't keep running from the past, no matter how far she went. The house was gone, yes, but the fear, the darkness, it was still inside her. It had become a part of her, like a shadow that would never leave. She had to face it, to confront the truth of what had happened, even if it meant admitting that the house had claimed more than just her freedom. It had claimed her peace, her sense of self. And now all that was left was the struggle to accept it. "I can't change it," she thought, "but I can live with it." The truth was painful, but it was hers to carry. No one could take that from her. Not the house, not the whispers, not the darkness. It would always be a part of her, but she could learn to live alongside it. The days grew quieter, and slowly, the whispers faded. The fear that had once consumed her began to lose its grip, though it never truly disappeared. Hannah had come to accept that the past would always be with her, lingering like a quiet storm on the horizon. She no longer tried to outrun it. Instead, she lived with it, learned from it. The house was gone, but its legacy, its mark, was part of her now. And though the road ahead would never be easy, she felt a quiet resolve in her chest. She had survived. She had faced the darkness and emerged on the other side, scarred but alive. She had broken free, and in that final moment, she realized that she didn't need to forget to move on. The memories would always be there, but they didn't define her. She did.